At 7:15 a.m. Sunday, October 5, 1997, the North Carolina Salad Police received a call from a woman named Tommygan. She told police that her husband David had not come home from work. The day before, she couldn't contact her husband, so she was very worried and wanted to ask the police to check. You are watching The Real Case. If you like our videos, don't forget to click like, subscribe to encourage our spirit. Thank you very much. David works at Loomis in Charlotte, one of the fastest-growing banking centers on the East Coast. Every day, hundreds of millions of dollars pass through this city, while Loomis is one of the companies specializing in storing and transporting cash for banks. The police rushed to David's workplace to check. When they arrived, the policeman saw that David's truck was moving outside the security fence gate, which also had no lock. The police entered and noticed that the door to the warehouse was also wide open. There was something very shady here. The police officer immediately called the center and requested police assistance, as well as contacting company management to try to understand what was going on. A moment later, the manager arrived and said that David had been responsible for locking up the warehouse the previous day, along with an intern. He rushed the police to the security room to check the security cameras, but they soon discovered that both videotapes were gone. The manager continued searching in another cabinet and fortunately found a videotape still in the machine. They immediately checked this tape. No one could believe what they were seeing in the tape. David, the warehouse manager, was emptying the vault of the stolen money that belonged to the federal banks. So this was a case, serious federal sentence. The FBI was immediately dispatched to the scene because all the keys to the warehouse were gone. So even company employees were locked outside and could not enter the warehouse. They had to call a welder to break the door lock, but this was a solid money warehouse, so it would take even the most skilled locksmith hours to break the door. While waiting to go into the warehouse to check, the police realized they had very little information about the case. All they knew was that the warehouse manager named David had disappeared with a large amount of money from the warehouse. A company armored truck also disappeared. The police do not know exactly how much money was lost, whether David acted alone or had accomplices, whether he was the culprit or just a victim forced to do this. Has David run away, or is he being kidnapped? Is it possible that David is being held in the warehouse? There were so many unanswered questions. But David was not in the warehouse. In fact, there was nothing in the warehouse. Before their eyes, a non-slip warehouse of nearly 1,300 kilo of cash with a total value of more than $17 million had evaporated. $17 million in 1997 is worth about $32 million today. That's a fortune, most of it in $20 bills. This money was intended to be used to deposit ATMs in the city, so none of the coins were marked, and the serial numbers on the bills were not consecutive. This means that this money cannot be traced. If the culprit spends this money right in front of the police, they will not know that these are illegal coins. Police searched the warehouse for more clues, but they found nothing. They then searched David's truck, which he had left inside. They found his wedding ring left in the car box. Wedding rings are extremely valuable, and a married person will usually always wear their wedding ring on David's hand. So why did he leave his wedding ring behind in the car? Is that a proof that he has severed all ties with his wife to live a new life? The police began investigating David's relationships, and the first person they interviewed was his wife, Tammy. Tammy said that she did not see David showing any unusual symptoms before the incident. She also admitted that the couple has a lot of credit card debt, so they have to live frugally and spend frugally. Tammy also affirmed that her husband is a gentle and cowardly person, and David was certainly forced to do this crazy thing. The story of the Loomis warehouse being stolen for more than $17 million soon attracted great attention from public opinion and the media. The police issued a nationwide arrest warrant and mobilized all forces to search for David, along with the stolen money. News about the theft and pictures of David were posted everywhere. Agents also increased inspections in the airport and bus station areas, and they called on people to provide any information, no matter how small. The police knew that the amount of cash was so large that the criminals definitely needed a large truck to transport it. Investigators went to all car rental companies to check this amount of money, but they did not get any clues. Actually, this is not the first robbery that happened at Loomis Money Transfer Company. In 1997, in Jacksonville, Florida, a warehouse employee named William Perry also emptied a vault worth more than $18 million in cash. In this case, the police found all the money hidden in a public rental storage facility in North Carolina. Thinking that David might also copy this case, FBI agents checked all the storage rental companies, but they found nothing. It seemed that the investigation had reached a dead end. It seemed that David and the $17 million had disappeared into thin air. However, the police knew clearly that David could not disappear, and even if David was murdered by his accomplices to take all the money, the $17 million could not disappear. There must be someone trying to disperse and spend this money. Police then looked to see if there was any suspicious activity the weekend after the robbery, but this is not easy either. At the time of the robbery, Salin City was holding a car race. Hundreds of thousands of people from everywhere had flocked here, making the management of people's entry and exit even more difficult. Then, 2 days after the robbery, the police received good news. First, on Monday afternoon, a man was mowing the lawn when he discovered an abandoned Limex truck in a desolate area about 10 miles from the Loomis warehouse. The truck was locked inside, and because Loomis Company employees still couldn't find their keys, the police had to tow the truck to the center to break the lock. When the mechanic broke the lock, they were shocked when they saw what was inside. Inside the truck was a pile of small denominations of cash left behind, a total of $3.3 million in the truck. Police also found 2 surveillance tapes stolen from the Loomis Company's security department, 1 company pistol, and 2 sets of vault keys. Why did the robber leave behind $3.3 million? This is a question that no one has an answer to. Maybe the robber was too scared, maybe he didn't have enough time to get rid of all the money, maybe he ran out of places to hide the money, maybe he carried the money. I was so tired that I decided to leave behind $3.3 million in change. Everyone has their own guess, but the police also agree that this is the craziest robbery they have ever known. Even though the truck was recovered and $3.3 million was spent, the investigation is still at a standstill. Police interviewed the intern working the same shift about David on the night of the incident. He insisted he had nothing to do with the robbery, just a normal shift. David sent him home after his shift, and David stayed behind to lock the vault. After talking to more than 100 people, friends, colleagues, and relatives of David, the police still had no useful clues other than conflicting information about him. David seems to have 2 very different personalities. Some colleagues describe David as a gentle, hard-working person who loves his job. Others say he is very dissatisfied with his job because of his meager salary. Some people say that David loves his wife very much and often goes to church. Others claim that David has an unhappy marriage. He often nags her and controls his spending and doesn't let him smoke in the home. But no matter what, no one believes that David dared to plan and do such a heinous thing. He was certainly forced to do it. The police also learned that David was a quiet person with few friends. The only person David talks to is a co-worker named Kelly. Kelly Campbell has worked alongside David for several years, but she quit her job about a year before the robbery. David's colleagues say there are rumors that David and Kelly have something more than friendship under love. They often met after work, even after Kelly quit her job. The police immediately found Kelly, but Kelly said that she was not as close to David as everyone thought, and that she had not contacted David since she quit her job. Although the police were somewhat skeptical about Kelly's honesty, they had no reason to continue interviewing her. This direction of investigation again reached a dead end. Investigators turned their attention to a new lead. On the night of the robbery, David used the company phone to call himself. This means that David gave his phone to someone outside the company. Data from David's pager also shows that he received many messages with the 3 digits 143. The police didn't know what the numbers meant, but they knew David didn't act alone. It's been a week since the robbery and confirmed that they are still at the starting line. By now, David and his gang could be anywhere. The police then offered a large reward to anyone with information that would help solve the case. After the bounty was announced, the investigation office received thousands of calls day and night because there might suddenly be a lot of money from the bounty. The investigation team spent a lot of time and effort verifying this information from thousands of calls to the police, leading to a call reporting that a man named Eric Payne had spent a lot of cash and money, enjoying a high life recently. Eric's life suddenly changed. He paid off all his credit cards, bought many expensive cars, and often held parties in luxury hotels. However, the police could not find any connection between Eric and David. However, one thing worth noting is that the graphics company where Eric works is right across the street from where Loomis's truck was abandoned. Is this just a coincidence, or is there some connection here? The police continue to investigate and monitor Eric's spending. They realized that Eric had paid for all his expenses with $20 bills. The police want to ask Eric to come to the station for questioning, but it turned out he was on a long vacation abroad, so the police could do nothing but wait for him to return. Meanwhile, another source said there is a couple buying real estate across the city. That couple is Steve Chambers and Michelle Chambers. One of the houses that the Chambers couple bought was a mansion in a wealthy area, 15 minutes by car from Charlotte. Steve and Michelle fell into the police's sights for many reasons. The first is that 16 weeks ago, this couple was living in a trailer. Both of them have not had a stable job for 2 years, but suddenly it seems like they have changed their lives in one step, with no money to spend. The second is that this couple paid for everything, including the $1 million house they just bought in cash, all in $20 bills. Michelle told everyone that her husband was a retired professional soccer player. However, a mayoress who lived a few blocks away said that the men in the neighborhood had never heard of him. A few weeks after the robbery, Steve Chambers was kicked out of a bar for getting into a fight with another man, where he became angry and threatened to buy out the bar for $400,000 just to get rid of him. The job of the guards. Even though Steve and his wife were very suspicious, the police still didn't have enough evidence to arrest them. All the police can do now is wait and continue monitoring. Police also investigated suspicious cash transactions at the bank. This is a time-consuming job as they have to sift through thousands of reports to see what information is new, potentially relevant to the case. Then the police's efforts paid off. A few days after the incident, Michelle Chambers went to the bank with a suitcase full of cash and asked the banker how much money she could put into her account without having to fill out paperwork. Declare. Steve is also seen going to another bank to deposit a large sum of cash in a safe. I don't know if Steve is too naive or too stupid, but clearly, this has put them in the sights of the police. The FBI began secretly monitoring the Chambers and his wife's house, but this was not easy. This is a small residential area, almost everyone knows each other. Any strange car with strange men can easily be noticed and suspected. FBI agents had to find an explanation when they received countless calls from people in the area, reporting that they saw suspicious cars with strange men wearing glasses appearing in the residential area, their residence. The police were worried that Steve and Michelle Chambers would learn they were being followed, but the police were too worried. It seemed like the whole neighborhood knew they were being watched by the FBI, except Steve and Michelle. 2 months after the robbery, the police still have not found David's whereabouts. David's wife and parents also haven't heard any news from him. Meanwhile, Steve and Michelle continue to spend lavishly on new cars, new houses, branded clothes, and luxury furniture. The two also bought a high-end furniture store and named it MS Furniture Gallery. It wasn't easy to reach out and get information from Steve and Michelle because they never talked to anyone other than their family members. The police had to go back to high school yearbooks to investigate the backgrounds of these two people. Investigators finally found what they were looking for. Thanks to the yearbook, the police discovered that both Steve and Michelle were classmates with Kelly Campbell, David's colleague. The police came to Kelly again, but she once again refused to cooperate with the police. Kelly continued to deny having any relationship with David and refused to take a polygraph test. So at this point, the police have a lot of suspects, but they still don't have enough evidence to charge anyone. Everything changed in January 1998. The FBI was monitoring a bank when Michelle walked in with a briefcase full of cash. This isn't the first time Michelle has put cash into the account. But this time was different from previous times. The wads of cash that Michelle brought were wrapped in Loomis Company money wrapping paper. Furthermore, these money wrappers still have the company employee's signature on them. This was the first solid evidence linking the Chambers and his wife to the robbery. With this evidence, the police were able to order Steve's arrest. However, the investigation team believes that, in addition to Chambers and his wife, there were many other people involved in the robbery. Therefore, the police decided to wait a little longer to capture the entire drive. The police asked for a warrant to install wiretaps on all the phones of Chambers and Kelly. Eavesdropping was a boring task. The police had to listen to all of Steve and Michelle's nonsense, gossip from Steve wanting to buy an entire island to build a hotel, to Michelle complaining about gaining weight and wanting to get lip injections. But in general, all conversations are worthless information. After a few weeks of eavesdropping, the police almost gave up and considered this option unfeasible. But then they received a call from Kelly Campbell telling Steve she had just received a phone call from David. Kelly says that David needs more money again. The agents were surprised because it appeared David had run out of money and was begging Kelly to send him money. How could someone who had robbed $17 million just a few months before spend it all? Steve told Kelly that they couldn't wait any longer. It's time to deal with David once and for all. Steve said that he hired Mike and many other gangsters to handle David. But they have a problem. Even though Kelly talked to David on the phone, she didn't know where David was. Steve says it's Kelly's job to find out where David is. A few days later, as expected, David called Kelly again. After just a few sentences, Kelly knew David's whereabouts. He's staying at a Cozumel, Mexico hotel and can't wait to start his new life with Kelly in Mexico. David had no idea that after telling Kelly his whereabouts, his fate had been decided. The FBI immediately sent people to Mexico, and they had to act quickly before it was too late. Sunday morning, March 1, 1998, 5 months after the robbery, FBI agents arrested David. David didn't seem surprised and even breathed a sigh of relief. He quietly followed the police and flew back to North Carolina. David came from a poor working-class family. He always worked hard and worked overtime, but his meager salary was just enough to get by. David's job is to hold money and deliver large bales of cash to banks.
And when you spend 12, 14 hours a day with it, and you're in every bank in Charlotte, it's a boring job.
Though David comes into contact with piles of cash every day, bitterly, he never has a penny in his pocket. David and his wife always had to live frugally. Whatever they bought, they had to pick up and put down. Meanwhile, Kelly and David occasionally see each other outside of work. David has feelings for Kelly, but nothing has crossed the line between the two. Then, on a date, Kelly kissed David and asked him what he would think if they robbed money from the company warehouse. Kelly says that David is the perfect person to pull off the robbery, and that the two of them can live anywhere, any way they want. Kelly also said that she had a friend in the gangster world who could help hide the money and help David escape. The three of them could divide the money into 3 parts, and each person would have at least more than $5 million. David was initially shocked to hear these things. Even though David had worked for the company for many years, he had never had the guts to think about robbing money, let alone doing it. David laughed and just shrugged, thinking it was a joke. Yet somehow Kelly's words still lingered in David's head. One day, David realized that it would take him 30 years to pay off all the credit debt he had, while Tammy was complaining because David wasted money on the lottery. David made an excited decision. He called Kelly. David began to pay attention to the company's operations, especially targeting weaknesses, even though the company was always equipped with the most modern security technology. They are always short of manpower. That's why David alone can keep 2 sets of keys to all the company's truck depots and offices.
I noticed that a lot of times, come the weekend, I was all by myself with the master key to the security system, with all the keys to the vehicles, all the keys to the building, everything I needed. It was right there in my lap.
David realized he could easily steal the money from the warehouse, but the worry is how to escape with that money. David began researching the FBI's investigation process and learned that most investigations only revolved around the area where the crime occurred and then gradually spread to surrounding areas. The police also often monitor airports, train stations, and bus stations, so David's plan is to flee as far as possible immediately. This means he needs a fake passport and a plane ticket out of the country. What is worth mentioning is that even though he was an accomplice, David had never met them. David only communicated with Steve through Kelly. Steve formed a gang to disperse the money after the robbery. This gang includes Steve's cousin Van Scott and a friend of his named Eric Payne. Steve promised to pay each person $100,000 to participate in the robbery. Steve also made a fake passport for David. Everything was ready. On October 4, 1997, David left home to go to work. He looked at his wife and knew in his heart that it would be the last time he saw her. David looked back at the old trailer he and his wife were living in, and then walked away decisively. David started his work like any other day. Meanwhile, the gang is waiting outside with David's phone. The plan was for David to transfer the money later when the last company truck returned. Around 5 p.m., David used the company phone to call Steve, who was waiting outside, to say that he couldn't get the money out until 6:30 or 7 p.m. after the last truck had returned. Company in stock. Now only David and the intern remained. David told the intern that he could go home and that David would stay behind to lock up the warehouse. Now there was only David and the pile of money in front of him. David paused for a few seconds to decide, while every few minutes Kelly texted with code 143, meaning, "I love you." Each number represents the number of letters in each word. It wasn't as complicated a code as the FBI thought it was. It took David nearly an hour to transfer all the money to the company truck. He then removed 2 tapes from 2 security cameras in the cabinet of the security room. David didn't know there was a 3rd security camera in another closet. David hurriedly drove to the meeting place where Steve and Kelly were waiting. David's heart was pounding. David's heart was dancing. He had never felt excitement like this in his life.
It was a great feeling. I mean, the ride wasn't very good, but it was a great feeling. It's probably one of the best drives I've ever taken in my life.
However, when David arrived, he saw not only Kelly and the friend she was talking about, but also 2 other people. However, in a panic, David did not ask much. He had to run away first and then worry about that later. David gave the car keys back to one of the strange men and then got into Kelly's car and fled, only quickly carrying a lump of money worth about $30,000. But when David left, the bandits encountered great trouble. The truck's key was in a keychain with more than 200 different keys. They frantically searched for the key to open the car, but the more they panicked, the more confused they became. Eric used a big rock to smash the car door, but he forgot that this was an armored car specifically used to transfer money, so any stones, guns, or bullets were useless. Meanwhile, David and Kelly were driving as fast as they could to the airport. Both of them were extremely excited. They had millions of dollars in their hands, and a life-like paradise was waiting for them. But after all his meticulous planning, David didn't think about how to bring a pile of cash on the plane. Kelly quickly bought a pair of socks and filled them with money, returned to Steve's gang. After a while of struggling, they finally found the key to open the truck. They were all stunned, their mouths wide open, looking at the huge pile of money they had never seen in their lives. But a few seconds later, they had to calm themselves down to take action. Steve had brought 3 large blue boxes to load the money with, but he clearly didn't expect it to be so much money. Because all 3 boxes were not enough to hold all the money, they had to leave piles of small denominations and find a place to dump the truck. Meanwhile, Kelly and David arrived at the Colombian airport, but they encountered a big problem. It seemed that David and Kelly were talking so much about the robbery that they forgot to buy a plane ticket when they arrived at the airport. After flying, the two realized there were no flights to Mexico, so they had to catch a bus to Mexico. After arriving in Mexico, David began to taste the luxurious life. He dined at the most expensive restaurants in the most luxurious hotels. The feeling of having millions of dollars in his hands is nothing better than happiness, David thought to himself. But David forgot that he didn't have any $1 million. The $30,000 in cash that David brought with him became less and less, and a few months later David had to call his accomplices and beg them to send him money. David wanted $50,000, but Steve only let a junior named Mike give David $8,000. Only then did David realize that he was holding a knife. He is wanted, and more bitterly, he may not get a penny at all. David always lived in anxiety and bitterness. One day, a man knocked on David's door and said that there were many people waiting for orders to deal with David. He just wanted to let David know to get some tips. David became even more scared, so he changed hotels and used a fake name to check in. But David made a mistake when he told Kelly the name of the hotel. From beginning to end, David still believed in Kelly and mistook their relationship for love. But it's clear that Kelly never loved David and never intended to move to Mexico to live with David. Chambers, Kelly, and the gang were also immediately arrested afterwards. Police recovered more than $1 million in cash from gang members. Of course, the police confiscated the most money and property from the Chambers and his wife's mansion. The police found cash everywhere in a shoebox under a mattress in the garage. Ironically, none of the 6 defendants had enough money to hire their own lawyer. A total of more than $10 million was recovered from 24 safes that Steve asked Lapp's relatives and friends for help. 21 defendants were convicted of racketeering. Eric Payne was sentenced to 6.5 years for helping to hide money. Vance Scott was sentenced to 4 years and 7 months for hiding the truck. Michelle Chambers received 7 years in prison, and Steve Chambers received 11 years and 3 months. McKinney received a sentence of 11 years and 6 months. Meanwhile, Kelly Campbell only received 5 years and 10 months. Robbery center David Gant received 7 years and 6 months in prison. Many people believe that the sentence they receive is too lenient and not a deterrent. Therefore, David never regretted and even felt proud of his actions. When he was asked if he could go back in time, would he do the same thing again, he calmly said, of course he would.
I've been sentenced. Would I do it again? Yeah. Opportunity like that comes around once in a lifetime. And now that I'm already in prison and been judged and everything, I can be more honest and say, sure. It was too much for my wife. She divorced me about a month ago now.
In 2016, the movie Mastermind was made based on the Loomis robbery. The movie was quite successful, and of course it was a comedy.
My name is David Gant. I always felt I was destined for a life of adventure.
Up in their house. Oh! Oh, that burns!
Oh my gosh, David, let me see!
How hard can it be? You load up a truck, and you drive away.
David was now out of prison with a wife, children, and a new life. In an interview, David said that he was excited to talk to the director of the film and that he had never felt embarrassed about his past. It's easy to be a kind person in a peaceful environment without temptations or challenges. Temptation is a test of human morality. When a person faces temptations, but still chooses to do the right thing and consistently follows his own moral rules, he is the most respectful and kind person. What do you think about David's actions and thoughts? Please leave a comment below in the comments section. Thank you very much.